Always consult a medical professional before starting or changing any of your medical treatment. None of the information contained within this podcast should be taken as personal medical advice.
Hello and welcome to the microdose. Just me, myself and I today, Belinda. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So today I want to talk about emotional eating and how for millions of people all over the world, this is a daily plight that they suffer from. And in some cases, multiple times a day, depending on what is happening in that day, in those moments. I guess, as well, when we think about someone being an emotional eater, it usually conjures up images of someone who eats when they are stressed to cope with stressful situations. But stress eating and emotional eating are two very different things. Stress is just one emotion, and there are an infinite number of emotions, an endless scale of how each emotion is felt by each individual. And because it involves psychological and emotional factors that vary wildly from person to person, it's not something that can be easily quantified or measured with numbers or any kind of concrete data. In fact, emotional eating can never really be quantified. Emotional eating is just difficult. It's not possible to measure in any precise or objective way. It really isn't, because it varies from person to person so drastically, So what is emotional eating exactly? Emotional eating can be triggered by a wide range of feelings, from stress to anxiety to joy to celebration. Some people may eat to cope with negative emotions, while others may overeat to feel like if they have positive emotions. And what makes emotional eating especially complex is that it's not just about food, it's about what the food represents behind it all. Comfort, nostalgia, love, even control. It's often deeply intertwined with the stories we tell ourselves about our worth, our needs, and the way we seek fulfillment. We might use food to recreate feelings of safety or to silence inner turmoil, but the food itself is never the true source of peace. It can't heal our emotional wounds. It merely distracts us from them. Now, for me personally, I was an emotional eater as far back as I can remember. Food always made me happy. I loved food. Who doesn't, If I was down about something, food made me feel better. If I was anxious, it would calm me down. If I was nervous, it would soothe me. And if I had something to celebrate, what would you do? What would I do? I'd go out and eat. Have a great time. Lovely. But I will never know why food was that crutch for me. I can never put my finger on it. I don't think I'll ever figure it out, to be honest. But here comes the kicker, right? Ozempic and Mounjaro and my 2-year journey. So what do we do when we can no longer use food in the way that we've been using it, for me, for the past 30 years at least, to calm us down or to soothe us? Because as everyone knows, these drugs, Ozempic and Mounjaro, the ones that I have taken, take away our ability to eat. They give us a satiety like you'd never known before. And yes, on these drugs you will feel hungry, but you will only have the ability to eat maybe a third of what you ate previously, before you start to feel full and uncomfortable. So the question is when and where do we go from here? When we can't use food in the way we used it previously, it's a really big question, Well, I think it is anyway. So my question is, where do we go from here when we can't use food to soothe us anymore? Now, talking from my own experience, I did not notice this shift for a good few months into my journey on this medication. That was purely because I was on a high. For most of the first 6 months, the drugs were working really well. Weight was melting off me. My mood was better than it ever had been in as long as I can remember. And I started to go and do the things that I loved. Then one day, after about a 2-week period of being extremely stressed with everything that was going on, I stood in the kitchen, and for the first time in months, actually no, not months, about a year and a half, I reached for the food to soothe my anxiety. I put that food in my mouth and I felt nothing. No calmness, no soothing, no relief, nothing. In fact, I remember feeling slightly confused as to why I reached for the food in the first place. But I just brushed it off in that moment. But I knew something had shifted, but I wasn't in the right headspace to think about it at that time. So I did what all women do, what all mothers do my age, and just went on about the next thing that needed to be done in that day. And I ignored my own thoughts and my own feelings and my own self. It wasn't until about 10 days later, I think, I was organising the week. On a Sunday evening, school drop-off, school pick-ups, appointments, you name it, all the things that needed to be done. And I was filling in the kids' board on the wall, and I was filling in my own board as well. And we have charts on the wall where we're supposed to be, when we're supposed to be doing it, and all the rest of it. And then it dawned on me in that moment that since starting this medication, I've been practicing Pilates for 2 solid years. I can do things in that class that I would never thought possible pre-Ozempic or pre-Mounjaro. Practicing Pilates 3 times a week, and that's a non-negotiable for me. And I go swimming a minimum of twice a week, 3 times if I'm lucky, and I walk my dog all the time. It was only then that I actually had the time to sit down and think about the day I reached for the food to soothe whatever I was dealing with at that time. And I did have the realization about what I do now instead of reaching for the food. Essentially, I created a whole other coping mechanism for myself without even realizing it. I exercise. That just happened. It was never something that I sat down and thought about. It was never something that I planned. Getting away from emotional eating was nothing I ever expected to come from Mounjaro or Ozempic. To be honest with you, I didn't even know I did it until I stopped doing it. So that is my story of how Ozempic and Mounjaro gave me the ability to create a whole different coping mechanism to cope with my emotional eating without even knowing it. And I don't think I will ever get over how this medication has changed my life in so many ways for the better. So now my question to you, listeners, is if you can relate to being an emotional eater for years and years and then decided to take this GLP1 medication, what's your story? Have you even realized that you're no longer doing it? Because it took me 6 months to realize, oh my God, I don't do that anymore, and that crept up on me very, very slowly. So just have a think how these medications have changed your life. And you can always DM myself or Paddy and let us know, because we are always there for all the stories. Always. Thanks so much for listening in and supporting our podcast, The Dose. Don't forget to follow along on both myself and Paddy's journeys on Instagram and TikTok. Myself, Belinda Hogan, Ozempic Insights, and Paddy Cunningham. His Instagram is Mounjaro Paddy and his TikTok is Mr. Mounjaro.
Always consult a medical professional before starting or changing any of your medical treatment. None of the information contained within this podcast should be taken as personal medical advice.